Hi, everyone. Welcome to our program. My name is Colin von Liebtag, and I head up our Alumni Career Development Program here through the Rutgers University Alumni Association. I'll be our host for our conversation with our author, coach, and professor, Melody Wilding. Just as a general reminder, and I just posted something in the chat here for you about that, microphones and videos have been muted for the event, but please do feel free to ask questions throughout the program, and we're going to get to as many of those as we can. You can do that through the chat feature or the Q&A feature there at the bottom of your screen. So please, have those come. We got plenty of great questions already lined up, but always happy to take as many as we can. Well, over the past couple of years, we've really seen a renewed consideration around the concept of work-life balance, and really viewing people as people rather than just colleagues or coworkers, and really trying to look at one another through more of a multidimensional kind of a lens. Today, with all that we have going on in the world, our lives at work and at home, this topic really for this afternoon's program couldn't be more relevant. That intersection of emotions and the workplace. We're very fortunate to have Melody Wilding here with us today to discuss her work in this field. So give you a bit of a background on Melody. Melody is the author of Trust Yourself, Stop Overthinking and Channeling Your Emotions for Success at Work. She was recently named one of Business Insider's most innovative coaches for her groundbreaking work on sensitive strivers. Her clients include CEOs, C-level executives, and managers at top Fortune 500 companies such as Google, Amazon, and JP Morgan, among others. Melody's been featured in the New York Times and Wall Street Journal and is a contributor to Harvard Business Review, Fast Company, Psychology Today, and Forbes. Melody's a licensed social worker with a master's from Columbia University and is a professor of human behavior at Hunter College. You can learn much more about Melody at melodywilding.com, and we're going to provide her contact info for everybody also at the end of the program and in our follow-up email. And now we're going to learn more from Melody directly. So Melody, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your work with us.
Thank you for having me. It is truly an honor to be here, because the one thing that was not mentioned in my bio is that I'm a Rutgers alumni. And my grandfather went to Rutgers, I went to Rutgers, my fiance, both of his parents went to Rutgers. So we're a Rutgers family through and through.
Wonderful. Yeah, we're so happy to have you. Thank you. So tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write Trust Yourself. Is there any kind of a story behind it?
Yeah, this book was really the intersection between my personal life and my professional life that I didn't even see coming. And so professionally, you mentioned I have a background as a social worker. So earlier on in my career, I was a therapist and I was working with very high achieving, career driven professionals who were struggling internally. They look like they have it all together on the outside, but on the inside, there's a lot of self-doubt, insecurity, perfectionism, people pleasing, all that sort of stuff that we'll touch on today. So this book really came about because I wanted to have a place to take my 10 years of coaching people, have a roadmap and a way to consolidate all of those tools and strategies into one place and give people a manual to be more successful in their lives. But it also came largely from my personal experiences, because I was that classic A+ gold star, good girl. And I'm sure many people here can relate to, you want to, when you're growing up, get the straight A in class, get the gold star, you go on to a good school like Rutgers, you do well, you get a good job. You feel like you're checking all of the boxes to be successful and trying to please everyone and meet their expectations along the way. And then you end up at some point in your career and you look around and you think, why am I still not happy? Why does everybody else look like they have it all together and I feel like I don't? And, I hit that point pretty early on in my career. And I tell a story in the book of a point where I hit a very severe burnout that almost killed me. And it was the wake-up call that I needed to really take all of my training and my background and everything I was doing with my clients and really use that on myself. So this book, they say you teach what you most need to learn. And there's a reason why this book is called Trust Yourself, because it is a lesson I have had to learn in my career, in my life, over and over and over again.
Yeah, that's where some of the best inspiration, I think, comes from, is that personal kind of aspect from the lives that we live that inform the work that we do. And I think you're a great example of that, certainly. You use the term sensitive strivers in the book, and it's something that I think many people, especially those with us today in the program, could probably identify with. Could you explain what a sensitive striver is and some of the most common challenges that they may face in the workplace, especially today?
Yeah. A sensitive striver is someone who is both high achieving. So they are driven their careers, they like to set and reach high goals, but they are also highly sensitive, meaning they think and feel everything more deeply. So if you are someone who can relate to walking into a room and being able to sort of instantly sense what the mood is, or you're someone who seems to just ruminate about something 10 times longer than most people, then you are probably a sensitive striver. And this was a pattern I saw among my clients again and again, that yes, they had this very driven personality, but they had these sensitive tendencies. And so sensitivity on its own is nothing new, that it has been around for ever, literally. And for over 40 years, there's been a lot of research around this trait. And it's literally a personality trait. Just like you can be introverted or extroverted, you can be more sensitive or less sensitive. And sensitivity itself really refers to how responsive is your nervous system to the environment around you and what's happening within you. So people who are more highly sensitive actually have genetic differences. They've discovered about 10 different gene variants that relate to how sensitive people, our brains actually process certain neurochemicals like serotonin, dopamine, things you've heard of, process those differently. And then we have more brain activation in areas related to sensing other people's emotions. So our mirror neurons, the neurons that are responsible for how we sense what's going on with someone else, they're more active. And so are the areas related to mental processing. So deeper decision making, deliberation, things like that. So this is a very real biological thing. If you're more sensitive, it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It's actually an evolutionary advantage, because back in prehistoric times, it was very helpful to have someone in your group who was vigilant of the surroundings, who was more cautious and reactive, who was on guard for danger. And that's why sensitivity as a trait has persisted for so many eons. So this trait, tremendous advantage. Obviously, it makes sensitive people very empathetic, caring, compassionate. We're deep thinkers, we're creative, intuitive, reflective, and I could go on and on. But on the same side, those traits can also lead to being more emotionally reactive or overthinking, overthink everything. Because most of us aren't taught that we're sensitive, so we beat ourselves up for being that way. But we're also not taught how to manage and channel our sensitivity correctly. So, like I was mentioning, emotional reactivity, overthinking, people pleasing, perfectionism, those are some of the most common patterns I see, as well as imposter syndrome, which I know we'll talk a little bit more about today.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the parts of your work that's so valuable, is that it blends together some of the science, behind why these things occur, and normalizes it, to that extent. Because when we talk about things like emotions, sometimes people, don't give it the same level of credibility as, let's say, like a physical illness that someone might show symptoms from. And this helps to make it something that's more real, more tangible. But also, as you're highlighting, it doesn't have to be what we might typically consider a weakness. There's a lot of strength that can come from this, when we have levels of self-awareness and we know how to kind of navigate those waters effectively. One of the questions that we had from our participants that came in with the registration process, I think ties in perfectly with this. So I'm gonna throw that one out there now. This individual said, "I have anxiety and tend to get worked up when someone asks me to talk without letting me know the topic first. I'll always assume I'm getting yelled at or possibly in trouble, even though that's usually not the case. How can I change this panic-inducing tendency?" I think it fits with so much of what you were just talking about, with this sense of perfectionism and sensitivity, and how we then process those emotions that correspond to something like this professional interaction. Could you speak a little bit to this concern that our participant has?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is very common. I see this happen all the time. I've actually written a lot about, how do you respond to that unplanned chat with your boss who, those three words that every person fears, which is, can we talk? And your mind just races to all of the worst case scenarios. And usually sometimes I ask in presentations, what comes up for you when you hear those three words? And people say, oh no, what did I do wrong? I must have made a mistake. I'm getting fired. So we immediately go to that catastrophizing, right? And that's very common for sensitive strivers because we have more of a high drive for safety, right? We're always on guard for danger. And so it's very natural that we'll hop to worst case scenario. So first and foremost is managing your physiology to manage your psychology. Because what people try to do is go immediately to trying to manage their thoughts and trying to change the story they're telling yourself. Or many times I see people invalidate what they're feeling. Like, you're just making a big deal out of it. Get over it. Get back to work. It's going to be nothing. Right. And then that only makes things worse for some reason. And that's because what you resist persists. So if you don't address your emotions, it's like trying to keep a beach ball underwater. You can only push them down for so long before you have to lift your hands up and it comes and smacks you in the face. So you have to address that emotional response. And emotions are simply energy in your body. It is simply your nervous system reacting to something you perceive as a stress in your environment. So the key way to bring down that emotional response is through managing your body, right? Managing your physical body. And I talk about this in chapter 4 in the book. I have an entire chapter on managing emotions that talks about managing this stress response. And it really comes down to grounding yourself. And grounding is any number of practices where you're bringing yourself out of that catastrophic thinking, out of the what ifs, out of the worst case scenarios, and you're bringing yourself back to the present moment. And so that can look like deep breathing, just taking a few deep belly breaths. It can look like doing a full body relaxation if you need to, or if you're in a meeting, for example, and you can't take 5 minutes out to do a whole body scan, just try relaxing your legs and your hips into your chair. Because when you start getting stressed, your body starts tensing up, right? And it starts creating this cycle where your body believes it's in danger. So the emotions heighten and it becomes this entire negative cycle. So grounding yourself is really key there. Once you've done that, you're in a better position to access your thinking because you've sort of you've short-circuited rather your primal brain, your emotionally reactive brain. You're in a better position to use the front part of your brain, which is where concentration, logical thought comes from. So one tool that I share with my clients in these types of situations is what I call the rule of 5. Very simple. You think of 5 other possibilities for what's another explanation that's happening here. What would my spouse or my best friend, my closest coworker tell me to do in this situation? If I knew everything was going to be okay, how would I respond? So the point of the rule of 5 is to get you out of that default, oh no, I did something wrong, or oh no, I'm going to get fired, and just to start expanding your mind to consider other possibilities, because your mind's sort of like a record player. And when we have those recurring negative thoughts, we get stuck on one groove. So you almost have to mentally pick up the needle and place it on a different track. And so you don't necessarily have to believe one of those 5 things, but the point is to get yourself out of that anxiety spiral.
Yeah, and again, so much physiologically tied to the emotional ramifications, that are almost like a vicious cycle, right? You're getting the emotional cues, which are causing physical symptoms, but if you can kind of check those physical symptoms, it recalibrates that emotional response as well. And so they really feed into each other, it sounds like. Help us to understand a little bit more about this idea of sensitive strivers, if you will. So what are some of those 6 key qualities that sensitive strivers would have? So maybe this will help us.
Yeah. So in my work, what I've done is categorize 6 key qualities that sensitive strivers have. And this is important because you either are one yourself or you know someone like this. 1 in 5 people is a sensitive striver. So again, you work with this type of person, you are this person. And so if you can understand, like you were saying before, Colin, having that self-awareness is power, right? Because you then understand what you're doing, you're in a better position to control and channel yourself. And so those 6 qualities, they very conveniently form the acronym STRIVE. So pretty easy to remember. So the first one is sensory sensitivity. That's aligned with what we were just talking about, the fact that we have this more exaggerated nervous system response. So again, we're more perceptive and observant of what's happening around us, which is a great strength because you notice subtleties that other people don't. But you can be overreactive or become overwhelmed very easily. So I see this a lot with when we're put under pressure or we feel like we're being evaluated or observed. So even in that person's question, they said, when I feel like I'm being put on the spot and I don't exactly know the answer. So those types of situations are very overstimulating. Second, our T is thoughtfulness. So that is that depth of thought and processing, reflective, intuitive thinkers. But on the flip side, that can turn into overthinking, indecision, doubt, all of that. Then we have R. Our R is responsibility. We didn't touch too much on that yet, but responsibility is this fact that sensitive strivers in particular, they are very loyal, they're team players, committed, dedicated to everything they do, highly responsible, which again, they are the person you want on your team, on your side. But that responsibility can go too far and we can overfunction. We can take on more responsibility than is ours. So if you are the one that swoops in to fix situations for everyone around you, you're the one that everyone relies on. It's nice to feel wanted, but that can make people too dependent on you. It can create a cycle where other people underfunction, so they don't take on their share of responsibility and you become resentful as a result because you're doing all the work. So that's our R. Inner drive is ambition, right? We set a lot of goals. We set high goals for ourselves. Sensitive strivers tend to have, they have a drive to keep learning and growing, not necessarily to climb to the top of the corporate ladder, but because they just want to be better and they're curious people. Flip side is that can turn into perfectionism. So we can hold a unrealistically high standard for ourselves. We can set too many goals and overwhelm ourselves or set ourselves up for disappointment or failure. And we tend to move the bar as to what qualifies as success before we've even reached one goal. Then we have V. Our V is vigilance, and that's being attuned to other people's needs around us. So again, we're empathetic. We understand what people need without them even having to say so, but that can lead to people pleasing, right? Because you can become so dependent on other people's approval and validation of you that you don't have your own internal self-worth. And then the last is emotionality, like we were just talking about. The one side of emotionality we didn't mention is that understanding your own emotions and other people's makes sensitive strivers excellent at influencing people, persuading them, because we know how to get to the heart of what people really want. But again, it can lead to emotional reactivity and everything we were just referencing. So you can tell all of these strive qualities, they have an upside. If they are managed correctly, right, they can be our superpower, but they also, if unmanaged, can hold us back. So I actually do have a quiz on my site, and I know we'll make that link available, but it's just melodywilding.com/quiz. If you want to know which of these strive qualities you need to work on, the quiz will tell you that. And I'll repeat them once more. So it is sensitivity, specifically sensory sensitivity, thoughtfulness, responsibility, inner drive, vigilance, and emotionality. So those are our strive qualities.
Excellent. Yeah, that provides such helpful context to understanding sensitive strivers and some of those opportunities, but also challenges that might come with, having that kind of disposition and characteristic to yourself. Can we apply this maybe to an example that came from one of our pre-registration questions? Would that be okay?
Absolutely.
All right, excellent. So this question came in and said, how do I stop emotional overflow? I'm a work crier, very personally invested in my job, so confrontation can be quite difficult. How do I reframe these emotions to prevent an outburst? And I'd actually like to tack on, how do we also maybe not just push the ball down under the water, like you said, but rather turn this into a strength or an asset?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a question I hear a lot, because this person who asked this hit the nail on the head, which is that we can become so personally invested in our jobs. We care so much that it moves us deeply when we maybe get feedback that's not always glowing, or we hear some bad news, right? It can actually move us so much more deeply. So what I do want to highlight here is that crying and expressing emotions in the workplace, but crying in particular, is not the curse that we think it is, or that it's been made out to be. There's a lot of research that shows, and surveys that have been done of C-level executives, that show that if a employee cries once or twice, that it's actually not perceived as that big of a deal. Obviously, this isn't something we want to do often, but I just want to offer that because I think so many of us are afraid of that happening, that it makes it worse. So I just want to offer that for people, that it's not as career ending as you might think it will be. And again, you put your finger on something important here, that crying is a sign of your emotional investment. So for yourself, changing that story, reframing that story that you tell yourself in your head, that, and I'm making some assumptions here, but that crying is a sign of weakness. It's a sign that you can't pull yourself together. You're not as strong as the people around you. It's actually a sign that you care more deeply and you want to make an impact, probably more than the people around you. So whenever I work with people that have this way of expressing their emotions, one thing I advise is to let the people around you know in advance. And so what I mean by that is, I'm very big on setting expectations and communicating with the people around you how you work and what your particular style is. Because you, as a sensitive striver, your style and your way of relating to and responding to things in the workplace is different than the other 80% of people around you. So it's really important you communicate that. So with crying in particular, what I suggest is that in a moment where things are calm and it is not an issue, that you have a discussion with your direct reports, with your manager, and you explain, hey, something I want you to be aware about, that you should know in working with me, is that I really care a lot about the work. I get very emotionally invested. And as a result of that, sometimes I may be moved to emotion if there's feedback or a situation doesn't go as hoped. And that may show up in the form of tears. Trust me that everything is okay. In that moment, you can ask me how I'm doing, or you may even say, I can manage myself, and if I need a timeout, I will take it. But if you can come from a position of strength when describing that, rather than what I see people do is crumble when that happens, and they say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I can't believe I'm crying. And that makes other people more uncomfortable. And also, it doesn't cast you in the right light, right? You're not proud. You don't feel in integrity with how you're responding. So if this is you, I definitely advise having that conversation with the people around you, letting them into the fact that this is how you respond. I could go on, but I just want to pause there for a second.
Yeah, no, that's great. And we actually have a follow-up question that's very much related. So that's perfect. So what happens if the emotional outburst does actually transpire and happen? This follow-up question is more about the damage control piece there. So I know you did speak to that a bit.
Yep.
What they're specifically asking is if there's still an issue that actually needs to be addressed, and that's kind of what triggered that emotional response. So how do you move forward, but still make it clear that there really is actually a problem that needs to be addressed here, and not have all of the emphasis delivered on or focusing rather on how the message was delivered rather than what the actual message is.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, right? Because the way it was delivered can take over. So just some tips for in the moment. Again, going back to managing your physiology, that's where breathing comes in. I also like to suggest displacing your energy. So one advantage to most of us being remote now is that you can have your hands out of sight and you can have a stress ball in your hand, or I often have a pen in my hand so I can displace some of my anxiousness onto my pen and allow that to come through me in a different way. Um, Cold water, cold exposure is very helpful if you're having an emotional reaction. So if you know you're going into a tense meeting, highly suggest having some cold ice water with you, because when you get emotional, your body heats up. And if you can help quickly cool that emotional response, it's going to help cool the emotions with it. So that's from the kind of what do you do in the moment. And again, I have some blogs on my site about this, which I can pop the link in the chat for. But in terms of what you do to move forward, what I would say, I want to be careful about this because you don't necessarily have to apologize. By expressing your emotions, you've done nothing wrong. And so what I think, it's important in that moment, you may have to take a timeout. You may have to say that, you know what, right now, I need some space to think about this situation or to clear my head. So why don't we regroup in a day or two to revisit this conversation? So rather than trying to push yourself through that emotion in the moment, it might be better to be diplomatic and be strong in that moment to say, let's take a time out and revisit this, because it's not going to be a productive conversation from either side. And when you speak to that person, again, I wouldn't necessarily apologize, because then you're assuming blame for something that is not, you really didn't do anything wrong. You didn't hurt the other person. You didn't lie. You were actually being authentic, if anything. So I wouldn't necessarily apologize, but I would say, looking back on that situation, and if you want to say, maybe I could have responded differently, what I definitely would say is, what I didn't have the words to say in that moment, but I want to say now is whatever. And sort of make it about the fact that maybe you didn't express yourself as articulately or as aptly as you wanted to in that moment. And you want to take this follow-up conversation to revisit whatever the matter is, to go back to the heart of the issue. I think all of that is important, rather than you staying focused on the emotional reaction and apologizing for it. I hope that makes sense. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so in the moment, some of those physiological responses to counter some of those physical behaviors we're feeling, the nervousness, we can use the pen. I use that tip actually with people when we're doing interview prep. I just tell them, don't click repeatedly on it, too much or anything, but it's a professional tool you can bring in. It doesn't look weird or anything in a meeting. You have a pen and you take some of the nervousness out on that.
Exactly.
Calm down with the cool water so you're not overheating, things like that. One of the other points, and you're, I think, alluding to this in a lot of ways, and we may have to have you back for a second session on this one, but this idea of work relationships with our work environments. We're in relationships with our work and with our places of work and the people that work there. And like anything else that's relationship oriented, it requires communication from multiple sides. But I think we also have to have safe spaces at work to be our authentic selves. Any tips for the workplace? And so this might be going a little bit more to managers, to HR folk, people who are helping to either transition that get us transitioned back to work, or help us create some new normals in the workplace. How do we create that safe space for people to be their authentic self and know that they're welcomed and supported to be so, while still managing business operations?
Yeah, it's such a great question. So important now when our lives, our work and our lives are so much more meshed and intertwined. They're almost inseparable for most of us now. And so going back to what I was saying earlier about really communicating around your work style, I think is a very important way to help create psychological safety and also allow people to be their true selves. And so if you are a manager, if you lead a team, you can do this. You can do this that way, or you can do this if you're an employee on a team, you can do it upwards as well. So I've had people who are an employee on the team and they put together what I call a me manual. And that me manual is basically a guide to how to work with you. How do you like to receive feedback? What type of praise do you prefer? What are your the best ways to communicate with you? When you are at your best, what do you look like? When you're at your worst, what do you look like? How do you learn best? And so it's really this guide that from you explains very authentically, this is how I work. And it's not meant to be done in a sort of braggadocious, this is the way it needs to be sort of way, but it's actually in service of all of the people around you, because if they understand you, your working relationship's going to be more harmonious. Your boss is going to get better work out of you because they understand how to make you productive, how to keep you happy and engaged. And so, like I said, this is something you can do if you're an employee and bring this to your boss. And I've had so many people whose boss then say, oh, I want to do one of these and I want to have the whole team do this. So you can do it as a bonding exercise with your team or at an offsite. And it can be really helpful just to give insight into people's personalities, to show that there's differences and be accepting of that, because what we're really talking about today is neurodiversity. So, and thankfully we've had many more conversations about different types of diversity in the workplace, gender, racial. We need to start talking more about neurodiversity, the fact that people's brains work differently, and we need to create space and acceptance for that in our workplaces.
Absolutely. And you bring up the idea of diversity, gender diversity, as one of those aspects. One of the questions that came in from the audience is related. Do we see any kind of gender bias towards women identifying as sensitive strivers? And if so, what are the implications of that?
When I started doing this work over 10 years ago, I was sure that women were more sensitive, and that may go to show my own bias. What the research shows is that the levels of sensitivity, so levels of people who have more highly reactive nervous systems or responsive nervous systems, are pretty much equal. Just I think it's 51% women, 49% men, but they're just about dead on equal. And that speaks to the fact that sensitivity is just a biological trait that exists pretty equally distributed among the population. What is different is socialization. And so women, and I talk about a little about this in the book, is that women, especially young girls, speaking for myself here, but maybe a lot of other women on today's event, young girls are brought up as you are meant to please everyone. You exist to make other people happy. You're meant to be the good girl and stay in line and follow the rules. And girls are trained to be likable, right? And by the time young girls are in their teens, it's a startling statistic that shows that young teen girls feel like they cannot fail. That's how much these pressures are on young women. Men face different pressures, right? They face pressures to not show their sensitivity because they have to be tough and macho, and don't let them see you sweat. Don't let them see you cry. So there's socialization and there's challenges on both sides.
So it really is, having to do with the manifestation of it. It's not so much that people aren't feeling sensitive or are based on gender, but rather how it manifests either kind of masks that a bit more or maybe makes it feel a little bit more pronounced.
It's how the trait of sensitivity interacts with your conditioning and your environment, right? So we have a nature piece, which is just our biological disposition, but then we have a nurture piece of what's the environment around you. So Dr. Elaine Aron, who originally did the research on high sensitivity, she is the one who coined the term highly sensitive person. She has amazing books on that topic, and I would highly suggest checking those out as well. She talks about the fact that sensitive people have differential susceptibility, which is a fancy way of saying that we are more affected by our surroundings. So that is why sensitive girls are more affected by the conditioning and the environment young girls typically face. Young men are more affected by the conditioning they face. But what's important here is that sensitive people who are in positive environments have above average outcomes. So they have outcomes that are better than typical people in terms of happiness, productivity, success, engagement, all of that, more than average in positive environments. If they are in negative or unsupportive environments, have worse than average outcomes. So this is why really being able to be conscious and conscientious about the types of people you surround yourself with, the types of boundaries you create, the types of work you choose to do, the workplaces that you choose to work in, all of that matters so much more for sensitive people because all of the effects are amplified.
In terms of, we're talking a lot about raising our levels of self-awareness and how to then, act and engage based off of that self-awareness we have. How does this translate to others though? And I base this question off of one coming in from our audience. How do you explain this neurodiversity trait to a new boss type who doesn't know that you're an excellent team member? They may make a first impression upon you as, according to their question, being a crybaby or overly emotional, that kind of thing. So someone who either doesn't know you or just doesn't quite get the concept and buy into it, they're just a little bit more rigid in their thinking. How do you kind of explain this to them?
Yeah, I think having that me manual is a good way to go. I think talking about the concept of neurodiversity, you can open it up by, and I've had many clients do this, open it up by talking about diversity in general, and then asking their boss, how much do you know about neurodiversity in particular? And starting to engage their boss in a conversation around that. And then they can open up to, well, actually, there's this thing called higher sensitivity. And I understand there are all sorts of assumptions that come along from sensitivity, but what I wanted to share with you is some of the research behind it. It's important to know what your boss responds to. Some bosses respond to data, right? They want to see the research studies, the stats are going to be convincing to them and say, wow, 1 in 5 people like this is on my team, or here are some of the stats about sensitivity. Wow, that's very compelling to me. Another boss is going to want to hear about the outcomes and results that sensitive people can, I don't want to say achieve better, but are have a tendency to do well. Because you're sensitive, what sorts of competitive advantage can you offer to your team? And not in sort of the crybaby sense, but one positive that many sensitive people bring is that because your brain is picking up on more information, you're synthesizing that more deeply, you're able to see connections and spot gaps and highlight opportunities before other people have gotten there. So if you are someone who in a meeting has ever held yourself back because you had an idea, but no one else had mentioned it yet, and you didn't know whether to bring it up because you thought it was stupid, because if it was a good idea, other people would be talking about it. I'm sure people may know what I'm talking about. That's classic among sensitive strivers because your brain has made those connections before other people have gotten there. And so that's something, if you have a boss who is swayed by outcomes, results, that's how you could present it to them. So it's really knowing about what type of information and presentation is going to be most persuasive to your manager and presenting it in that light.
Absolutely. And, a lot of what you're talking about is this concept of reframing, I think, for some folks, things that were initially looked at as a weakness or, being overly emotional, reframing that as being one of your strengths, being an asset, being a superpower at work, if you will. So this idea of reframing the experience of being a sensitive striver, and how we can view things as opportunities rather than challenges. To do this may require us to deal with our past experiences a little bit too, and provide some kind of context or healing to those. So how could you speak a little bit to how our past can influence the present and why we're even maybe sensitive to certain things?
Yeah.
And especially if it's dealing with managers, work situations, things like that, how can we effectively kind of deal with the past in order to reframe and then basically
Mhm.
move on with our asset or our superpower?
Yeah, and I'm seeing this more and more now, as many of you have heard of the Great Resignation, where people in record numbers are leaving their jobs, switching roles, switching industries, and it's very exciting. But what comes along with that is wrestling with some of this baggage, frankly, that many of us may have. Particularly, I see this if you came from a work environment where you were dealing with a difficult manager. It was a toxic situation. Your manager wasn't supportive. They micromanaged you. You may be scarred from that experience. You may actually have some post-traumatic stress from that experience. And it's important to deal with it, because if you don't, then you may fall back into some of the same patterns that cause some of those dynamics to then repeat in your present position, right? Or you're just going to allow yourself to suffer, right? Paranoia, you always feel like you're looking over your shoulder, you're waiting for the other foot to drop. So, what I would say, to go into your next job with a fresh slate, it's important to forgive yourself and to bring closure to that situation. There's one exercise in the book, it's in chapter 3, and it's all about giving yourself permission. And giving yourself permission involves forgiving yourself for not knowing everything, or maybe not having the knowledge or insight you think you should have had in that situation. But your permission slip is all about looking forward. And as sensitive strivers, we tend to source permission and validation and approval from everyone outside of ourselves. That's part of our vigilance, right? Is we're always looking around to see, are other people happy? Are they satisfied? Is everything okay? Right? We're kind of peacekeepers. It's really important to source that validation from within, and writing yourself that permission slip, giving yourself permission to be successful, to fail, to do things differently, to accept yourself the way you are, is a very important step to just mentally and emotionally getting yourself on the right page going into that experience. So that's one thing, giving yourself that permission and forgiveness. The second that I find really useful to do with many clients who are getting over a bad boss or a toxic situation is doing a DIY 360. You may know what a 360 is. If you've ever done one in your workplace, it's when you get feedback from a number of different people around you to better understand your strengths, your areas for growth, things like that. So this is a DIY version. You're doing it on your own. And what I have many of my clients do, or people who participate in my courses and workshops, I have them reach out to maybe 5 to 7 people in your life. It can be former coworkers, former bosses who you had a good relationship with, colleagues who know you in a professional capacity. Maybe you are in a membership organization with them, or you met them at a conference. The point of this exercise is to see yourself from other people's eyes. So you're going to email these 5 to 7 people and say, hey, I'm working on a professional development exercise and I would love your help with this. Could you answer these 2 quick questions for me? 2 to 3 sentences would be great. What do you think my top 3 skills are? And the second is, what did you enjoy most about working with me? It's really scary to do this, I know, but anytime I have someone do this, they say, I was really afraid to send those emails, but what I got back was so valuable, because the things you readily disregard in yourself are usually the things that other people appreciate the most in you. So this is going to help build your confidence. It's going to help you see yourself in a new light, to give words to what your skills and strengths are, perhaps in a way that you didn't have. And that can really build your courage up for that new situation.
And I think this is a perfect segue into what I think will just based on time be our last major kind of topical area for today. And then we have one more audience question I'd like to be able to get to. So validation, overthinking, rumination. these all start to sound like they could be a little bit related to imposter syndrome. Something many of us, I think, have heard about, which is, a real challenge that people face. I mean, I know for me, I'll see clients at all career levels, from executive level all the way to new recent grads in their first job, experiencing some form of this. So it's a big challenge, I think, for many individuals, but also especially probably sensitive strivers in the workplace. So what can we do about that?
Good old imposter syndrome. Yes, this is the number one thing I work with people on. And so for anyone who's not aware, imposter syndrome is a term that refers to a collection of feelings and thoughts that make you feel like a fake or a fraud, despite the fact that you have lots of evidence you are accomplished and capable. So that's the key there, is that it's a difference between your self-perception, which tends to be overly negative and you see yourself as incapable, versus what the reality is. And so there are so many strategies for this, but for the sake of time, something that's very actionable is creating your brag file. Now, I talked about the DIY 360. That's sort of getting feedback to see yourself through other people's eyes. But your brag file is an ongoing place where you are logging your accomplishments. So I like to recommend at the end of every day, I will accept at the end of every week, but on a regular basis, you are logging your wins, milestones you have hit, positive praise you've received, difficult things you've overcome. If you had to overcome resistance, you had a tough conversation with someone, you negotiated through conflict. All of those things go in your brag file. This is important because a hallmark of imposter syndrome is an inability to internalize your accomplishments. So with imposter syndrome, you push away all the good and you overly focus on the negative. And so your brag file starts to rewire that tendency, starts to help you place a little more attention on what is going well, what are your talents and your skills, versus spending all of your time on where don't I measure up. And it's just very practically useful, because when it comes time to revamp your resume, to work on your performance review, you have everything right there in front of you. You don't sit there for hours thinking, oh my gosh, I've done nothing good with my career or in this entire year. So it's very practical in that sense too.
And something you can keep as a living documentation, really, of the progress that you've made. So it's the immediate gratification, I think, too, but also as you review that over time, you see that sometimes, even though it may feel like we're kind of stuck, we're making actual progress. You've gotten great feedback, you've grown professionally, you've developed new skills, whatever it might be. So it sounds like, same as we need those physical cues sometimes to remind us and bring us back to a place of more balance, we may need emotional cues too. And that's what that brag file, or I've heard it called a smile file too. Something like that could really, really help us with.
Absolutely. Yeah, you nailed it.
Great. So in terms of sensitive strivers in the workplace, and I think this can certainly relate to something like imposter syndrome. There's times you're around negative people. It might be that toxic boss. And when you have someone like that, it can be very easy to focus, I think, on some of those negative things that then feed into imposter syndrome and reinforce the negative mechanics more so than the positive ones. So if you're dealing with a toxic boss or a toxic coworker, how could you recommend for a sensitive striver to do that effectively so that they can stay calm, but also confident as they're dealing with someone else who has poor communication, lack of trust, constant criticism, short of just leaving that position?
Yeah. And sensitive strivers tend to struggle the most with people who are aggressive, dominant personalities. And I intentionally don't use the word assertive, because assertiveness is different. And assertiveness is actually what we want to aim for. So if you think about communication, it's a spectrum. One side, you have aggressiveness, which is sort of my way or the highway. I win, you lose. On the other side of the spectrum, we have passive communication, which is you win, I lose. I'll be a pushover and bend over backwards. In the middle, we have assertiveness, which is I win, you win. So aiming to respect yourself, but also other people. And so with toxic, difficult people, we want to bulk up our assertive communication. That is all sorts of things around learning to say no with respect and with tact. It's learning to make requests more assertively. So one area is one way to do this rather is with the assertiveness formula. And so with that, you state the facts, of the situation, which common example I use is you're being asked to, your boss is just asking more and more of you. So you may say, I have been working overtime for the past 8 weeks. And if someone looked at your timesheets, there would be no way to dispute that, right? It's fact. State the facts of the situation. Then you state how you feel using I language. I feel like I'm beginning to burn out, and that may be compromising my ability to focus on my work effectively. And then you make a request of the situation. What I would like to do is review my workload with you and figure out what can be deprioritized and what should be my top focus to make sure I'm focused on that. So that assertiveness formula can be very helpful because most of the time we don't know how to push back and make requests of those people. Internal boundaries is huge with difficult people of all types, because as someone who's sensitive, you're taking all of that in, right? It's almost like you're an emotional sponge. And so internal boundaries are a little tougher to understand because we know what external boundaries are, right? Close off your workspace, end work at a certain time. They're very tangible. But internal boundaries are how much do you allow something to take up space in your mind and in your heart, right? So if you're someone who holds on to a negative piece of criticism for days, then you need to work on internal boundaries. A few ways to do that. A very simple one is to protect your energy. And this may sound a little woo, but stay with me for a second. Whenever you're going into an interaction with a overly critical person, what I suggest is ahead of time, you do a visualization to protect your energy. That may look like, I have one friend who would imagine she was painting on gold armor, and that was sort of her protection if she had to go into a tough conversation with someone who was a little belligerent. I have a lot of people who like to imagine sort of a bubble around them, a clear bubble or a clear pane of glass between them and the other person as a way to sort of keep their emotions and their reactions, keep those to the other person and not to personalize them. So that's one thing. A second thing, another very tactical suggestion for dealing with feedback, even if it's not constructive, is to parse it. So many times when we get feedback, we spiral out about it. But what many of my clients find helpful is to parse it. And how you can do that, you take a sheet of paper, you split it into 4 columns. The first column is what was said, the exact words the person said, not your interpretation or story about it. The second column is everything that was wrong with what they said. Blind spots, inaccuracies, just plain meanness in the feedback. Third column is what might be right with the feedback. So is there a kernel of truth? Is there one helpful suggestion? And you may find that there's nothing helpful, and that's good information too. And then the last column is what are you going to do about it? Do you need to have a follow-up conversation? Do you need to change something in your workflow? Do you just need to take a walk around the block to cool off and let this go? So all of those are really helpful ways, but assertiveness and boundaries are really key with dealing with toxic or difficult people.
You know, one of the things that I appreciate so much about you sharing your insights and your expertise with us today, but also obviously through your work, is that it gives us a sense of control. It gives us a sense of tangible, actionable items and steps we can take that'll help us to be our best selves, to bring out our best, and really reconnect with pieces of ourselves that may have been lost in the shuffle. Lost because of workplace norms or societal norms or stressors that we experience. And this gives us a sense to reconnect and then gain some control back for ourselves and really be empowered, which I think is so key to this idea of sensitive strivers, is that this is a power. This is a good thing when you utilize it as an asset rather than as something as a detriment, and look at it that way. And also a beautiful gift you can share with others, to make more meaningful interactions and engagements. So thank you so much for sharing that with us, and providing such great insights and helpful advice for us. We really do appreciate it. And we're proud of you as an alumni, and very thankful for you being with us here.
Thank you so much. It's been my absolute pleasure. And thank you all for taking time out of your day to join, to ask such excellent, insightful questions. It really makes for such a wonderful conversation.
Thanks so much. And I also want to thank Stephanie and our events team so much for orchestrating all this, pulling it together. Melody and I, we wouldn't have been able to be here without them. So thank you, Stephanie. They're the magic behind the scenes for us. So thank you all for attending. We hope to see you at a future event and wish you all well.